Yeah, but it's still going to be easier today than it was yesterday. So yesterday, the Gemara introduced us to another source for the fact that Avia Ubaila Mafira Nidareha. The first source that we had was from the Pasuk in Yosy Elish, because again, the way the parsha of the Nedarim is structured is that first the Torah talks about a woman who makes a neder b'veis avia in hureha when she's single, and it says that her father could be made for her nedarim. Then the pasuk introduces him Yosy Elish unidareh alel, and once again it talks about the husband being mefer, and we learn from the vav of the im about the husband being mefer that the husband has to be mefer in conjunction with the father. And since it says unidareh alel, it's mashma that even if this woman came into the marriage with pre-existing nedarim, since the husband is doing this hafara in conjunction, in partnership with her father, he could even be made for nedarim that pre-existed the marriage, because no nedarim pre-existed her father. And then there's a third parsha that discusses Vimbeis Isha Nadara, where it's referring to an Asua. Beis Isha Nadara means only Nadarim that were made by her while she was married to her husband, where her husband is made for independent of anybody else without any shutvis. That was the first Mahalach of the Gemara, which was Rava or Rabba, depending on your girsa. And then on Samach Chesam Aleph yesterday, the Gemara introduced another makar for this halacha, Devei Rabbi Yishmael. They learned from the end of the parsha, from the end of the entire parsha of Nedarim, the pasuk mixes everybody together. Eila hachukim asher tziva Hashem es Moshe ben ish leishtoi ben av levitoi ben ura beis avia. And that's where we learn that ish leishtoi av levitoi is speaking about Hanara Hamurasa, as it says ben ura beis avia. And from there we know that Hanara Hamurasa, her husband and her father, are partners. Once the Gemara came up with this new makar, we have to discuss what each of these two opinions do with the other pasuk. So the Gemara said, Rava's pasuk Yisiyah, we can also use to teach us a rule that there's no difference between the second husband and the first husband. If the first husband dies, we're talking about an arusa, not an asua. If the first husband dies, the second husband stands in his shoes to do whatever he was able to do, which the Gemara will elaborate on the Afayim. The Gemara wants to know what does the Rabbi who learns it from Hayisiya, what does he do with the pasuk that the Rabbi Shmuel brings of Eila Hachukim? So he learns that it teaches us that not only can a husband be made for Nedarim of Idu Nefesh, which are listed beferish in the Torah, but the husband can also be made for Nedarim shebeinoi lebeina, because it says bein ish leishta. The Ran brought a machlokes if this restriction also applies to a father. A husband surely can only be made for two subsets of Nedarim, either Nedarim shebeinoi lebeina or Nedarim of inui nefesh. A father is a machlokes rishonim. According to the Rambam, a father can be made for any Nedarim. And according to the other Rishonim, a father is limited to the same Nedarim that a husband is limited to, which are Nedarim shebeinoi lebeina and Nedarim of inui nefesh. Then the Gemara had a shaila of when we have two partners who are being made for Nedarim, the father and the son-in-law, or the father and the husband. When one does his hafara before the other, what is the status of the neder in this in-between stage? Do we say that half of the neder disappears and the other half is full force, which means if someone ate, let's say it was an issur to eat, someone ate everything, we assume that they ate the piece that still has its full force neder on it, and then they would get malchus, or miklish kolish, or do you say when one of the partners of the hafara makes a hafara, it weakens the entire neder and it removes from the neder an isser malchus, or an isser carbon, according to a certain Rishonim. The Gemara ended up saying that it's totally in a machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel on Samach Tes Amud Aleph. And there's a lot of new concepts we learned in the Brisa that we brought a raya from. So first, let me focus on the actual raya. There's such a concept that whenever a husband, if an Oris dies, whatever schus he had to be made for the Nedarim drains back down to the father. Masha Enkein. On the flip side, if a father dies while a woman is in Arusa, the father's chusim in being made for the neder don't drain down, don't transfer, don't go b'Yerusha to the new husband. And the Brisa gives us two sets of comparisons or contrasts between the husband not yarshaning the schus to be made for from the father-in-law, while the father-in-law, in similar cases, would yarshin the rights to be made for from the son-in-law. We had a couple of svaris. The Ran said there's two different svaris here. On the one hand, you might at first glance say that if the neder is b'chol toikvoi, that would be more difficult for the surviving partner to be made for. It's a full-blown neder in its full force. But on the flip side, Dr. Ram, there's also an argument to make that once the neder is weakened, there's not enough neder to transfer. So it's a chiddush in both directions. It's a chiddush that a father could yarshin his son-in-law's rights to be made for a neder, even a neder that's in its full strength. That's a chiddush. Even a neder in its full strength, the father could yarshin the son-in-law's right to do that neder, made for the neder. Let me finish. On the other side of the coin, there's also a chiddush that the father could yarshin the rights from his son-in-law to be made for a weakened neder, because you might think it's such a weak neder, there's nothing to transfer over to the father-in-law. So the Ran taught us, and he shows us from the Brisa that it's a chiddush in both directions. But that is a given, that the fact that a neder is weakened makes it difficult to be Yerushit. As a matter of fact, the only reason why a father-in-law could yarshin a weakened neder and be made for it is because we're talking about a neder that got weakened, is because his son-in-law, while he was alive, he was made for his half. That weakened the neder. But the Brisa tells us that once the son-in-law dies, his afar evaporates, and now the neder regains its strength. And that's the only reason why the father now could yarshin that weakened neder, because in fact it's not weakened anymore after the person who was made for it, after the son-in-law who was made for it in his lifetime died, that hafara evaporates, since it wasn't met yet with the second hafara of the other partner. So based on that, the last case that we brought the raya from was from Shama Avia v'Hafer-in-law. The father heard the neder. They were both alive. The father and the husband were both alive. The father heard the neder and was made for it. The husband didn't have a chance to even hear the neder until he died. So the father's hafara still stands because the father is still alive. The husband can't do his part anymore because the husband died. Now the husband's part is a very faint, weakened neder because the father's hafara still stands. He's still very much alive. So the Brisa says, even though the neder is in a weakened state, the father can still yarshin whatever's left of it and be made for it. But Rab Nosson said that this halacha is only according to Beis Shammai. But according to Beis Hillel, since the neder is in a weakened state, he wouldn't be able to yarshin it. So the Gemara wants to say that maybe it's totally, not maybe, that it is totally in this shaila. The reason why Beis Shammai holds that the father can yarshin the son-in-law's chelik of the neder to be made for it is because it's not weakened at all. Whatever ratio of the neder is left, even if there's 5% of the neder left, but it's the full neder on 5% of whatever the isser is upon, but it's a full force neder. That's the concept of megas guys. Whatever is left is full force. That's something that could be transferred from the son-in-law to the father-in-law. But if you learn, like Beis Hillel, that Miklish Kolish, the entire neder is weakened, then a weak neder like that wouldn't be able to be transferred from the son-in-law to the father-in-law, and that's why Beis Hillel would argue on this brisa, Shema Bina. Okay, Gabaldik, what were you saying?
No, it's such a good recap.
It's
like you're doing the Chazara.
Yeah, I had to clear my head.
Very good. No, it gets oriented.
Yeah.
It's not because the husband died, so she goes back to the girl's state and fertig. And so goes as if it's a come husband and the father has the full force. I say there was something.
I need you to tell me the very specific case you're talking about.
When the father was my friend.
So they're both alive, and only the father was made.
But then the Baal wasn't maspik, and then he died. So it goes back to the father.
So now the father can continue the hafara and wipe out the nether completely.
Because she became back a girl. That's why the father has the full.
Because the nether was made when the husband was there, so he has to have that part back. Even though she became a girl now, so if she makes now a new nether, yeah, the father could be made for it. But we're talking about a nether that the husband already had a chelik of. That's who said goes back.
That's what I see before. I understand if the father dies and she's not fully a wife, that's why the husband can't have it.
Well, we're looking at the nether. It's not only the girl. Her matzav now is not as important as the nether. So now we have a new set of shilas. Boy Rav. Yesh sha'ila behekim. The ganze Sache is a shaila. It's a shaila. Yesh sha'ila behekim or ain't sha'ila behekim. Can you be shoyal on kiyum? And imtim tzaloimer yesh sha'ila behekim. And if you'll agree that you can make a shaila in the hekim, could you? In other words, the father was mekayim the nether, the husband was mekayim the nether, and then he says, "Oh yeah, I shouldn't have been mekayim the nether." And he goes to the Rav and he wants to be shoyal. Had I known A, B, or C, I would never have been mekayim the nether. And if you could be mekayim the nether, yesh sheila b'hafer, ain't sheila b'hafer. Could you make sheila on the hafar or not? So let's see what this shaila is, because this is a very, very interesting shaila that the Ran helps us with. Boy Rabba yesh sheila b'hafer. Im kayim haneder. So the husband or the father was mekayim haneder, and then the initial boy b'yoim ala hekim. The Ran, not everybody holds like the Ran, but the Ran holds initial boy b'yoim on that very same day ala hekim. Mi matzur mefer boy b'yoim. Could he still make a far that day? Oiloi. Aval l'macher zok the Ran shito d'loi matri mefer d'loi gar mishtika. Even if I'm shoyal on the hakama, the clock of 24 hours started to tick the moment the father or the husband heard about this nether. So all of this has to be done within the 24 hours. Because even if there was a never hakama in the first place, he still would have had to make his afara within 24 hours. That's what the Ran says. But there are those Rishonim who argue and says once you make hiyum, the clock stops ticking. Why does the clock stop ticking? Because the halacha is, if you didn't hear about the nether, or if you didn't know that you have a right to be made for the nether, then you have 24 hours from when you heard about the nether, or from when you became aware that you could be made for the nether. Once you were makayim the nether, at that point you don't think you could be made for anymore. So the clock stops ticking. That's what some Rishonim learn. Clearly, the Ran does not learn that way. But then there's a shaila. Okay, let's learn the next Ran, and then we'll get to the next shaila. In Tim Shaloimer, yei sheila b'hakim, yei sheila b'hafer, or ein sheila. Near be'enai, the apple gav de b'hafer lo shayach sheila. Even though you cannot be shoyal on afara, why not? The bishlam hakim is kein idrahu. By being mekayim her nether, it's like you're enforcing her nether, so you're being shoyal on being enforcing her nether. Aval afara loy. There's nothing to be. There's not. You didn't create anything with the afara. So how can you be shoyal on something? Afilu hachi. Even though minasvara, there's no logical reason why it should be possible to be shoyal on a hafara. Iyei sheila b'hafar mishum da'afara v'akama iskish la'adadi. Only because there's a hekesh between hafara and akama. So even though logically hafara does not make sense to be able to be shoyal upon, because of the hekesh, we'll say that he can. Shani hacha, damar kra. It says in the pasuk, Isha yikimenu, Isha yiferenu. So you see that there's a hekesh there, and we learn Ashabalach lahakim, balach lahafer, a nether that you could be Mekayim, you could be Mefer. We'll see what that's referring to later. But in Mishum Hachi, since you see a direct comparison between Hakam and Afara, then we'll say Im Timsa Loimar, the Yeshela B'Hakim, B'Hafer Mahu, do you use the Hekesh to extend She'ela Afara, even though it's not logical to say that. Even though it doesn't make sense to say that there should be She'ela there, but Xeris Akosov overcomes everything. Havil Hachi, I'm reading the She'ela, the Iskushi, Iskish, Oidilma, Lemilsa, the Hafara, the Lechazulai, something where it doesn't make sense to plug in the concept of She'ela on Hafara, Lo Iskish, the Hekesh, is not teaching us that. Umaskinon, in a moment, we're going to bring a raya with Rabbi Yochanan till in She'ela Lo Iskish. So let's see what the Gemara says. Tashma, Damar Rabbi Yochanan, Nisholon ala Hakim, V'lo Nisholon ala Hafer. Now, there's another Shiloh. There's another Shiloh that the Rishonim asked. There's a couple of Shilohs, actually. If you're Shoyl on Hakom, right? Do you have to now be Mefer? Or is the actual act of being Shoyl on the Hakama a Hafara? Because why else would I be Shoyl on the Hakama? Only because I want to make a Hafara. So if I go to the Rav and I'm Shoyl on my Hakama, do I then have to go and make a Hafara? Or is the Shayla that you made on the Hakama in and of itself a Hafara?
From the round, it shows that I'm a dafiyah, and I just want to speak 24 hours.
Oh, very good, very good. So that's one of the rayas they say. From the Rab that says that the clock continues to tick, means he's saying that good, you got rid of that comma. Oh, but you still ran out of time for your hafara. So you have a raya that in fact you'd have to make a hafara. Yeah, could be that's a good svara. Could be that's a good svara. Because the Ran says it's all about that 24-hour period that you have. Let me ask you another shayla. There's two ways to make hafara. There's two ways to make hakama. By saying I agree with the nether, and by waiting 24 hours and not protesting. That's also hakama. Can you be shoyal on the hakama of not having? Can you be shoyal on the hakama of not having been made for 24 hours? Venich Weiss, when I would have known A, B, or C, I would have never been quiet for 24 hours. I would have protested right away. So they want to taina, and it'll be titled in this shayla in the Ran. According to the Ran, where after 24 hours you run out of time, so even if you could be shoyal, even if technically you could be shoyal on the shtika, it doesn't really matter. You can't be made for anymore because it's too late. But if you hold that that maybe the clock stops, you could be shoyal. But there is such a shayla in that as well. Gavaltic. Okay, let's see the Gemara Vaitis. Boy Rabba. Rabba has a shayla. Look at this fellow. Well, this is what the guy says. Kayim lechi. He said kiyum twice. V'nishal al hakama rishon, and he was shoyal on the first hakama. So only the first hakama gets eliminated, not the second. So mahu, will you say that the second hakama now gets into first position? Tashma the Amar Rava im nishal al rishon. When it came to a shvuah, someone made two shvuahs. Shvuah shelo echol kikar zeh, and then he made another shvuah shelo echol kikar zeh, and he made a she'ela on the first shvuah. The halach is that shniya chala olav, the second shvuah is chal on him, and therefore, hu adin bayas. If you were shoyal on the first hakama, then the second hakama comes into place. Frek the karanar, a very pashat kasha, a very logical kasha, practical kasha. Why was I shoyal on the hakama? Because I have charata that I made it. So if I have charata that I made the first hakama, don't they automatically have charata that I made the second hakama? The same reason that exists why the first hakama was a toyis meikari, which is how she'ela works. Well, then by definition, the second one is also mushal. So how could the second one survive? That's the shayla of the Karanayr, who's a Rishon, who blind shver. The Shalman Nedarim, I think, was written in the turn of the century. He had a very pasha teres. Sometimes you could have a reason to be shoyal on one hakama and not another hakama. For instance, the first hakama the person made when he was very, very angry. He wasn't of sound mind. And then later on, he calmed down and he made a second Nakama. So he went to the Rav. Could be Hitaka wants to be Shoel both. But the Rav says on the first Hakama, I could give you a Pesach. You weren't of sound mind. But by the second Hakama, there's nothing I can do for you. So the halacha is that the second Hakama will click into place. Push the shot. But Kishma. Gewaltig. Okay, Zok the Gemara weiter. Boy Rabba. Rabba has another Shiloh. Look at this Shiloh. Kayim Lechi, Umufar Lechi. I'm making a Kiyam. I'm making a Afara. V'lo Seichel Hakama, but Hakama shouldn't be Chal, Ela Imkain, Chal Hafara. Unless the Afara is Chal. Now, so let's try this again. Let's break this down. What if he just said, Kayim Lechi, Umufar Lechi? If he just said that, without a suffix, the halacha would be the kiyam is chal first, and then hafar won't work anymore.
If it's talking about
Ah, so you're speaking out very good. If I said kayim lechi, mufar lechi, without the vav, then you would be able to explain the mufar lechi is being chosher from his kiyam toich kedei dibur. But he didn't say that. He said kayim lechi mufar lechi. That means he's putting them in order. First, I want a kiyam, and then I want a hafara. Well, once you have, so you weren't chayzer on the kiyam. I want the kiyam, then I want the hafara. So that means the kiyam will be chal. The hafara wouldn't be able to be chal anymore. But then he added another clause. So he made it tonight. So what I would answer to this shaila, not like the Gemara, I would have answered, I think there's a pill for this. I think there's a pill you can take for this type of nether. Because, but this is what the guy said. So right away they ask Akasha, how could you make a Tanai on Hakama? There's a rule that you cannot make a Tanai on anything that you cannot make a Shliach to do. I could make a Shliach to marry a woman. I could make a Shliach, could you make a Kedushin on this woman for me? Therefore, I can be Mekadosh a woman with a Tanai. I can make a Kedushin on Menashe in a Nedarim, right? I'm only marrying you the condition that you don't have any Nedarim on you. A get, I can send a shliach to give a get. Therefore, I'm able to make a t'nai. But things that you cannot make a t'nai on, like chalitza, for instance, things you cannot make a shliach for, like chalitza, for instance, you cannot make chalitza on a t'nai. It's either done or not done. Could you make a shliach to do hafara or hakama? No, that's something you have to do yourself. So, Fregen Achroinim, how is it possible that you could make a Tanai in Hakama if, in fact, you couldn't make a Shliach to do it? So there's a lot of Torah on this, but the Reb Chaim Brisker says that the Shlichus that's used to make a Kedushin is very different, or a Tanai that's used in a Kedushin is very different from the Tanai that's used when you're making a Hakama. And he explains as follows. There's a rule that we learn how Tanoim work from the Tanai of Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuben. If you want to make a transaction with a Tanai, well, who said that your Tanai has the right to limit the transaction that you wanted to make? You said Arayat Mukadeshesli. Who said now you could make Tanoim? It's Chal. Whoever said there is such a mechanism? We learn from Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuben that there is such a mechanism that will limit your chalois that you made, and it will limit it if you follow the rules of the syntax and the structure of how a Tanai has to be made. That Tanai is governed by rules. One of the rules is that it has to be something you can make through shlichus. And Prime explains, there's actually a Tosfos that says this, that we learned, that if you could make shlichus, if you could do something through shlichus, it shows that you master this so strongly that you have such control over it. Therefore, you could tinker with it, and you could make a t'nai on it. But something that you don't control enough. And what is the litmus test? Because you can't make a shliach to do it for you. You don't have enough control over this act to be able to tinker with it and make a t'nai. Zokt Reb Chaim, that's not how a t'nai works when it comes to Nedarim. All t'nais by Nedarim, whether it's Rakama or to make Neder, it works completely differently. All it does is it makes it into a nether toss. I make a nether. If you don't do ABC, if you don't do this favor for me, ABC, I'm asking you all my things. If you end up doing it, it renders my nether a mistake because I never wanted it under those conditions. So, Zok Reb Chaim, the rules of Tanai don't apply, the rules of Tanai as applied everywhere else don't apply to Nedarim, because by Nedarim, Tanai doesn't work with the new Chiddishtik mechanism of Tanai that you're tinkering and modifying a chlois. No, it just magnifies and reveals and shows everybody that this nether was a mistake. That's why Chaim held that this shouldn't be a problem here. So boy Rabbi, Chaim Lechi, I'm sorry?
A backstory.
Yeah. Chaim Lechi, Umufelechi, V'loiseichel Akama, Ela Im Kintchola Afara Ma'u. So this is a very convoluted shaila, and we need to get a good understanding of what the shaila is. I'm sorry? It's confusing, right? He said Kiyum, then Afara, which is much he wants to Kiyum, and then he puts in a night to doesn't want to Kiyum. So what does this guy want? Right? What does this fellow want? Other than right? What does he want? So let's see what the Ran says. Boy Rabba, Kaim Lechi, Umufelechi, Chazina Bahach Boya, I saw in this Shaila, Uhamayda Pashtinenba, and how it was answered, Lakamoizal, from people who wrote Pshotim before me, Mili Dinai Lahir. I saw Pshotim that I'm not very happy with. Umishum Haki, Mifarash Naba Maidis Chazli. Therefore, I feel the need to put that on paper and explain how I understand this Gemara. L'Rabba, Pshitale Da'Kamaloi Chai. So the first Hanocha that the Ran says is, there's no question about it. This Kiyum is not going to survive. He made it tonight. So for sure there's no Kiyum. The Mamanashach. And the Ran now goes and spends time showing us why, without a doubt, there's no question here that Akama could not be Chal. The Mamanashach. If the Hafara is Chal, there can't be a Kiyum. Even though on the fine we have a suffix, if someone said Kaim l'chisha, umufar l'chisha, I want it to be mekuyim for an hour, and then I want it to be mufar, there the Gemara has a shaila, ichayli tarvayu oiloi. You actually say there's a kiyum for an hour, and then there's a hafara. But the reason why there it could work is because I set a time frame for each thing. Shani hosam, shenosin kitzva, la'akam of hafara. But that's not what happened here. Here I wanted them both to be chal right away. Abel hacha, but over here Zoktaran, shaloi nosan kitzva. He didn't say when this should occur and when that should occur. Pshita, it's poshet. The ihafara chayla, if the hafara is chal, hakama loy chayla, because you can't be mekayim and nether that's non-existent. Ucha de chesivna. The amrit hafara loy chayla. And if you're going to suggest that the hafara is not chal, so therefore the kiyum could be chal, well, mina the hakama nami lechayla. If you're going to say that the hafara is not chal, well, then the hakama can't be chal either because of the t'nai that he made. So asni va'amar the loiseichel hakama elam king chal hafara. So because of this, no matter how you analyze what he said, no matter how you slice it or dice it, the hakama cannot survive here. So the question here is the nether mufar or not? It's for sure not mekuyim. Aval ba'afara hu the misapkale. The whole shaila that the Gemara is asking here is after he says this whole sentence, is the nether still alive, or does his sentence constitute a hafara? Mi amrina, do you say kivan da aktim v'amar kayim l'chi? Since what did he say first? Kayim l'chi. So that shows that he's giving precedence to the kiyum. Ubasar hachi amar mufar l'chi. And only after he said kayim l'chi did he say mufar l'chi. Mashma the asni the teichel afara basar hakama. It's a mashma that what he wants is that he wants first the hakama to be chal, and then he wants the afara to be chal. V'lo seichel afara ela im came kadma lo hakama. He made it clear that he only wants the afara to be chal if he was able to first make the hakama before, because that's how he laid it out. Kiyam l'chi and then umufar l'chi. Ella the mishum haki asni. Why did he make this tonight? If he really wanted the kiyum to exist before the afara, so why did he throw in the tanai at the end? El Dimshomachi Asni Lo Seichel Hakama, Elam Kain Chol Hafara, V'lo Asni Nami Ibcha. Look, he didn't. If he was so concerned about the Hakama being Chal, then why didn't he say that the Hafara shouldn't be Chal unless the Hakama is Chal? He didn't say that. He was much more protective over the Hafara because he said, unless the Hafara is Chal, I don't want the Hakama to be Chal. So on the one hand, he seems to be giving precedence to the Hakama, but on the other hand, he seems to be more concerned about the survival of the Hafara. Why? Since he expressed the kiyum before the Hafara, he didn't feel the need to protect his kiyum by making the Tanai that the Hafara shouldn't be chal unless the kiyum is chal. You know why? Why? The bereisha itkala. So what he did was he balanced this. He's a lunatic, but he's a lunatic with a calculation. He wanted to give precedence to the Hakama, so he said Kaim L'chi first, but he didn't want the Hafara to be chopped liver, so he had to throw in the Tanai to protect the Hafara. So the Hakama is protected because it's mentioned first. The Hafara is protected because of the Tanai. But Adrabah, Mishum Dechai Dechai LaHakama Kulahai Adla Shavka Rafa LaHafara, since he was concerned that since he gave precedence to the Hakama, it will be Chal and no longer allow the Hafara to work. That's why he had to protect the Hafara. Asni v'omar t'loiseichel Hakama elim kein chol Hafara. Marehu ki'ilu hisnal shteyan. It's as if he made a t'nai on both, that either one should not be Chal without the other. Sheichel Hakama b'tchilu b'achar Hafara. So that means he wants both. So I believe on this side he wanted the Hafara. I'm sorry. On this side the Hakama won't be Chal. On side the Hafara won't be Chal, because he's literally measuring his words to balance them out exactly. And therefore, neither of them would be able to be Chal. That's one side. You see how Chazal spent so much time analyzing the words of a lunatic, because we need to understand the ramifications of his words. Or maybe let's analyze this lunatic's words a little bit different. Nehida Amar don't say he wanted it to be balanced, like in the first perspective. Rather, let's say he didn't want it to be balanced. Let's say he actually was more concerned about the Hafara than he was about the Hakama. Even though he mentioned the Hakama first. It's not because he wanted the Hafara to be Chal only after the Hakama. That's not why. The only reason why he put Hakama first is he never meant to give Hakama any type of precedence. But what should he do? He cannot say two words at the same time. He cannot say Kayim L'chi and Mufar L'chi at the same time. But he never meant to give precedence to the Kiyum. Umiyu Hai Gavra the Hafara Kapit the Tachel. His main concern is that the Hafara should work. How do I know? Because in the first half of his sentence, he was balanced. Kaim L'chi, Mufar L'chi does not give precedence to either one over the other. Because, like the Iran just said, the only reason why I said one first is because I cannot possibly say them both together. However, he did show clearly that he wanted to give Hafara precedence. He made that t'nai to strengthen the Hafara. He wanted them to both be chal at the same time. Since you see he was more concerned about protecting his Hafara than he was about protecting his Hakama, Asni, he put that t'nai in, if they will clash and the Hakama will impact the Hafara, the magledaiti l'tech l'Hakama. If I can't have it my way to have both, then I'd rather just have the Hafara. That's what he made clear with this tonight. Avol gav the chalois Hafara ma'agav chalois Hakama lo yasid l'tech l'Hafara. You see, he was no protective over the Hakama because he didn't say that if the Hafara will interfere with the Hakama, I don't want the Hafara. He only said it the other way around. So clearly, from his language, he wants the Hafara. Hilchach hafara chayla, hakama loy chayla. Therefore, the hafara will be chal, the hakama will not be chal. So that is the shayla.
Even the Akuma was first. The words of that.
Exactly. So really, what the shayla is, to break it down in a simple nutshell, is the fact that he said kayim l'chi first. Does that show that he wants to give any type of precedence to the hakama, like the first sad, or it doesn't show that he wants to give precedence to hakama? He just can't express two words together. But he really never meant to give any precedence to the hakama. That is the shayla. So the Gemara answered the shayla. The Gemara brought a raya from a familiar Gemara. Zog to Gemara. Tashumami plukta der Reb Meir Reb Yosy. There's a famous machloikis between Reb Meir and Reb Yosy in Tamura. The Tanan we learned. Harezu Tamuras Oila Tamura Shlam. We know that there's an isser to make a Tamura. If you have a carbon oil sitting here, and you take an animal and you walk near your other animal, and you say this animal, which is now chulin, should be a Tamura for this oila. I want it to be in place of the oila. What is the halacha? The halacha is, first of all, it's also to do that. But if you do that, what its impact will be that the animal that you wanted to put in place of the oila will get the kedushas oila. But the kedushas oila that you wanted to remove from the original carbon will not go off. So they both remain with the kedushas oila. What if someone said, Harezu Tamur Oila Tamur Shmol? It should be a Tamur of an oila and a Tamur of a shlaman. So what is it? So the halacha is, there's a machlokes. Harezu Tamuras Oila divrei Reb Meir. Reb Meir says, he said Tamuras Oila first. It becomes a Tamuras Oila. And once it becomes a Tamuras Oila, it can no longer be a Tamuras Shlomim. But Reb Yosy Omer, you look at it as if he wants them to be done simultaneously. Im lekach nischaven mitchila. If that's what he really wanted, if you ask him, and he said, no, I didn't want it to be sequential. I wanted it simultaneously to become a Tamur of an Oila and a Tamur of a Shlomim. The only reason why I didn't say it together is because I could only articulate one word at a time. Therefore, Dvar of Kayavin, therefore, we say that this animal is a Tamur of an Oila and a Shlomim. Can't do anything with it. You wait till it gets a mum, you sell it, and with half the money, you'll buy an Oila. With the other half of the money, you'll buy a Shlom. So the Ram drills down in understanding the mechanics of this machlokes between Reb Meir and Reb Yosy, because once we understand the mechanics, we'll be able to extract from this machlokes a pshitus on the shayla that we have here. So let's see what the Ram says over here. Upashtinan law, we looked at Reb Meir and Reb Yosy, they argued, there's a similar machlokes to our question in Tamura, the Perak Ketzet Marivin. The same lunatic who made problems for the Rabbanim in the Nedarim with his crazy articulations, he was also making trouble for them when they were learning Kachim. The Tanan we learned, Harezu Tamuras Oila Tamur Shlomim. The halacha according to Reb Meir is Harezu Tamuras Oila divrei Reb Meir. Rabbi Yosy Omer, like our Gemara quotes, if he claims that he wanted both, in fact, it's both. The Gemara there starts to qualify the machlokes and clarify it for us. Both Reb Meir and Reb Yosy agree. If he made his will clear that I want it sequential, of course, it will only become a Tamuras Oila. And after it became a Tamuras Oila, it can no longer become a Tamuras Shlomim. So that's not a matter of dispute. What if he made it so crystal clear that he bedavka wanted them to both be chal at the same time? So he said, so there clearly he wants them both to be chal at the same time. Tavayu kachin. Even Reb Meir agrees that it has the kedusha of a oila and a shlomim. Because once again, he made his intention quite clear. So here the Ran is hinting to us something very important. There's a very significant difference between our case and their case. In their case, it is possible for an animal to become both Tamuras Oila and Shlomim. But in our case, it's impossible for a neder to be Mekuyim and Hufer. You can't say half the neder is mukuyim and half the neder is hufar. So that is the fundamental difference between this sugya and that sugya, and that's going to play a role in how we understand the raya. The tira behemazu achet estov. How could you deal with an animal that's both a temuras oila and a temuras shlamim? Put it out the pasture. The yovi bid mechetcha oila with mechetcha shlamim. So loy nechlaku. So where is the machlekes of Meir Besi? Obviously, the machlekes is in a case where there could be a disagreement between them as to what the intention of this person who made this temura was. Loy nechlaku elaba oimer temuras oila temuras shlamim. If he said those words, temuras oila temuras shlamim, how do we interpret it? Reb Meir Savar midahava le'lememer temuras oila ushlamim. He could have said, if he wanted it to be both, he could have said, this should be temuras oila ushlamim. But he didn't say that. Amar temuras oila temuras shlamim. By sticking in that extra word temura, that shows clearly that he wants it to be sequential. Havalei kaimer tochozu v'achach tochozu. So Reb Meir is medayik from the words that he said, that his intention is that it should be sequential. Reb Yosy Savar, Reb Yosy says, the after the Ma'adika Amar temuras oila temuras shlamim. Yes, he could have said temuras oila v'shlamim, but it doesn't mean he wants it to be sequential. He still wants it to be b'vasachas. So why did he speak out the second word temura? He thought he had to. Toy, he made a mistake. The sober iloy amina temura akol chad v'chad loy chala temura tabayim. He thought it wouldn't work, but not that I wanted it to be sequential. So there's an argument in what his das was. According to Reb Meir, clearly that says he wants it to be sequential. According to Yosy, yes, the wording itself seems to be sequential, but he might have made a mistake in thinking that this could mean simultaneous. Hilchach, Rabbi Yosy says, we don't just pass him for him. It could go either way. So what you need to do is, you actually ask him what his intention was. And then it's tirachet historia. According to Reb Meir, you don't ask him. Your words mean sequential. According to Rabbi Yosy, your words can go either way, so we ask you what you meant. So now that we got a clarity in the exact parameters of the machlokes, Reb Meir and Rabbi Yosy, let's see how that impacts our shiloh here. Alma, you see from here, Pluktayud Reb Meir Rabbi Yosy, Talia b'moitzi shnei shemois mipiv. If someone speaks out two things from his mouth, oilo shlomim, or it's similar in our case, kiyom afara, yamrinon sheyochel hasheni achar harishoin, or sheyochelu shnei b'vasachas. Right, that's the question. Do you say I meant sequential, or do you say I meant simultaneous? Why would you say I mean simultaneous? I said them sequentially, because you cannot say them simultaneous, but you meant simultaneous. Therefore, we say, to the Rabbi Yosy, the Gemara is going to say, according to Rabbi Yosy, Vada ifsid bayam. According to Rabbi Yosy, it's pashut our case. The chi amar umufur lechi lav basar akama kamar el bevasachas. Rabbi Yosy holds even by tumuras oila tumuras shlomim, we say he meant bevasachas. So kaim lechi mufur lechi with a t'nai on the top, clearly he's displaying his intention that he wants them both to be chal. Therefore, the afar is chal because he wants the afar to be chal. V'chitema, and if you ask me, afilu hachi, heicha chayla, how could it be chal? The signal the kamon, the call she'ena b'zeh chazeh, afilu b'vasachas einay. I faked around. We have another complication. There's another rule. There's a rule that anything that cannot be chal one after the other cannot be chal b'vasachas either. You cannot have a kiyim chal after a hafara. You can't have a hafara chal after a kiyim. Doesn't work. Lav milsi, that's not a kasha. The hacha, no, you can't. There's nothing to be mekayim. There's nothing left to be mekayim. After the hafara, there's nothing to be mekayim. But that's a very good point you're bringing up, and I want to address it in a second. The hacha loyma akva hakama hafara. The hakama is not ma'akav the hafara. Why not in this case? Because in this case, the asni ba'amar le'seichel hakama. So therefore, it will be chal zachazeh. So according to Rabbi Yosy, we for sure have an answer to our shaila. The hafara would for sure be chal. But even according to Reb Meir, we would have a good raya. Why? The Avagav Damar Hasam. Even though in the case of Temura, he said that he Amar Temura Shlomim Basar Temuras Oilaka Amar Veloy Chayla. Even though with there he means sequential. Here he wouldn't mean sequential. You know why? Halcha Shiny The Kivin the Amar Leiseichel Akoma Elam Ken Chola Afara. Here he made his intention much clearer. He added a Tanai afterwards. So even Reb Meir would agree. Goli Adaite, he's telling us quite clearly the Hafara who decoupled Akamaloi. He's telling us that he's more concerned about the Hafara than he is about the Akama. So even Reb Meir would agree in our case that he clarified what his intention was. He didn't mean there should be a Hafara after the Akama because it wouldn't work. So let's have a look. The Gemara inside it is very, very simple. According to Reb Meir, since he said the Tamur the second time, instead of just saying Tamur's Oila Vishlamim, it means he wanted sequential different Meir. Rabbi Yosy Amar, in Lekach Mischavim Etkila, it can go either way you ask him. And if he says he wanted it simultaneous, so the Gemara doesn't even address Rabbi Yosy. According to Rabbi Yosy, it's simple. I obviously meant them both at the same time, therefore I want my afar to be chal. But even according to Rabbi Meir, he only said that you assume it's sequential because there's no Tanai here. But in our case, that's so black and white that he wants the hafara. Reb Meir nami moida to hafara chala. Beautiful. Boy Rabba, we got to finish the daf. Boy Rabba, kayim umufar lechi b'vasachas mahu. And the Rambam has a shaila. Did he say kayim umufar lechi? Is that what he said? And the Gemara is explaining that it was b'vasachas, or did he say the words kayim lechi? He said all those words. Now, what would Allah be? The Tashma, the Omar Rabba said, "Call Dover Sheina B'Zachar." Anything that can be one after the other, Afilu B'Vasachas Einoi, and therefore it wouldn't work. So, what would the halacha be? So let's see the round. Upashtin law be the Rabba the Omar Per Kalish Kadish. If you try to marry two sisters, which you're not allowed to do, but you try to make two kedushinos at the same time, since you couldn't marry one after the other, neither of them has any kedushin at all. It's as if you did nothing. So what the Ram is saying here, we're paskening here, since there was no kiyum and there was no afara, you have a clean slate. You can do what you want. The Rambam paskins, it's mekuyim. Sepis. V'sepis. So they say a gewaltige Torah, and it was touching on what you said. The hakama clashes with the afara, and the afara clashes with the hakama. But let's see how they clash. Why does the afara clash with the hakama? Because once you're mekayim it, you can't be made for anymore. The Akama doesn't let the Hafara be chal. That's a clash. But why does the Hakama clash with the Hafara? Not because the Hafara doesn't allow the Kiyum to happen. Once there's a Hafara, there's no more negative to be Mekuyim. So it's really like getting in the back door. So Zok to Rambam, Gishmak. Why is the Kiyum chal and not the Hafara? Because the Hafara doesn't really stop the Hakama. The Hafara circumvents it. So it's not really clashing. So therefore, the Akama won't let the Afar be chal, but the Afar is not strong enough because the Afar cannot take on the Akama head on. It could only it could only prevent the Akama because there's nothing left to be Mekayim. So therefore, the Rambam holds the Akama should be dominant. Boy Rabba, what if someone said Kayim l'chi hayoyim? There should be a Kiyim today. So that seems to indicate that tomorrow he wants Afar. Mao mi amrinan. Command the Amr law, move for the Chila Machar, because we've been died from his words that he wants the Afar to occur tomorrow. Al Dima Hala Amr law, or maybe he didn't say it. So if he didn't say it, then he doesn't want Afar tomorrow. And that will stop here, and we'll be Mamshach B'ez Hashem tomorrow. So today was complicated, but not nearly as complicated as yesterday.